I was walking home from the mall on Valentine's Day, feeling pretty good about my day of shopping and indulging in some much-needed me time. The sun was starting to set and the sky was a beautiful shade of pink and orange, so I decided to take the long way home to enjoy the peacefulness of the quiet streets and the beauty of the sky above me. I was 25 and excited to be starting a new job at the coffee shop next to my apartment. I had finally moved out of my parents' house and was beginning to feel like my life was going in the direction I wanted it to. I was listening to music through my earbuds, but had this nerve-wracking feeling that something was just off. It's like I could feel someone watching me. Almost like an invisible set of eyes were just locked directly to my every move. My heart began to race and my breathing became shallow as I quickened my pace, and I was desperate just to get home. I looked over my shoulder and, of course, there he was. My ex. The one who couldn't get over me and just wouldn't leave me alone. After we broke up almost a year before this, he did everything he could to convince me to take him back. At first, it was normal stuff like having flowers sent to my home or mailing me sweet letters in the mail. It was romantic and nice and kind of innocent even, but I didn't want to get back together with him, so I never responded to any of it. At this point, I hadn't seen or heard from him for a couple of months, and I thought that he had finally gotten the hint that it was over between us, but apparently not. He was walking about 10 feet behind me, and when I looked back at him, I could see this sort of sinister look in his eyes. He had always been a bit creepy, but this was some next-level stuff. He didn't say a word. He just sort of smiled this horribly disturbing smile. I tried to ignore him and keep walking, but he started following me more closely, getting closer and closer with each step. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him, but he was still there, and every step that I took, he took the same one, only 5 feet behind me. I started to feel my panic set in. I'd always felt safe walking home alone, but now I felt like I was being hunted or stalked like someone's prey. I pulled out my phone, calling a friend, but she didn't answer. I tried calling my roommate, but still no answer. I was completely alone with no one to help me. I had called the police on him many times before, and the last time they just straight up told me not to call again about him unless it was a life or death situation, and I really didn't want to hear about that again. So I started to run, hoping to get to my apartment building before he caught up with me. I could hear him getting closer and closer with every step, and so close that I could even hear his heavy breathing. I was gasping for air and my heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew that I had to keep running. I finally made it to my building and ran inside, but he caught the door and followed me in. I could hear his footsteps echoing down the hall as I ran to my apartment and locked the door behind me once I was safely inside. I was okay. I wanted to scream and cry at the same time, but it wasn't over yet. I tried to calm myself down, but my mind was just racing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to make a scene, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just wanted it all to be over. I wanted my ex to be one of those guys that just moves on when a relationship ends. My roommate found me curled up in a ball in front of the door and asked me what happened. Through tears and hyperventilation, I told her everything. She was horrified and told me that she didn't care what they said the last time that I had called and that she was calling the police, because being chased home by your psycho stalker ex is in fact life or death. Just as she got a hold of the dispatcher, we heard a noise outside the door. I froze, my heart racing. My roommate and I stared at each other with wide eyes, waiting, listening for any noise coming from outside my door. Was he trying to get inside? I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case. The noise stopped and I started to relax a little. My roommate was explaining everything to the dispatcher when suddenly it started again. This time it was louder. It was a loud banging noise, but the banging wasn't coming from the door. It was almost like he was stomping around outside the door, having a tantrum that he wasn't able to get inside. I'd never experienced that side of him, and I never knew that he was capable of doing something like this. Throughout our whole relationship, he seemed so normal. The reason we broke up was because he had cheated, and I felt like if he was willing to risk our whole relationship for one night with a random woman, then our relationship didn't mean much to him to begin with. You'd think that he would have been able to move on by the time this all happened. I crept up to the door, knife in hand, and peered through the peephole. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear someone breathing. It sounded like his mouth was pressed against the door like he wanted to hear it. I started to panic again, but my roommate tried her best to calm me down. The police told us to stay inside and keep the door locked until they arrived. They said it would only take around 10 minutes for them to get there. We sat on the floor and waited for the police. All the while, I could hear him still breathing on the other side of the door, and I knew that all he wanted was to get inside and do God knows what to me. Finally, the police got there, and they arrested my ex. He didn't put up a fight and went with them willingly. They took him away, and I was finally able to sort of breathe a sigh of relief, but unfortunately, this sort of fear and panic would stay with me for quite a long time. No matter how much I wanted to or how convenient it would be, I could never get myself to walk home alone again. I never forgot the feeling of being followed and hunted by someone who had supposedly loved me before. I was lucky to make it out alive, but the thought of what could have happened is something I still think about almost every day. I never thought that someone I once loved could turn into a monster. It's important to always trust your instincts. I learned that the hard way, and I hope that my story can serve as a warning to others. It serves as a reminder that sometimes love can just turn into an obsession, and that obsession can turn into something much more dangerous. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.